thank you so much. I'm going to introduce our last book selection committee of the evening, who is then going to in turn introduce our last author of the evening. So I am beyond happy to introduce my newest friend of the three friends that I have in here. So I can actually show us Loki, Mike, and Maritza, everybody's my friend at this point. Amara Johnson from the Trumbull Library, who was a member of the Adult Book Selection Committee, who worked with my coworker, Ashley Sklar. Ashley had nothing but fantastic things to say about you, Amara, like not even just about this, just like in general. I think she might be one of your biggest fans, at least of the people that I know. So thank you so much for being here and for introducing our last speaker and sort of fielding these questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was wonderful. I'd actually like to thank both Kim and Ashley for bringing All CT Reads to life. This has been a wonderful experience. And it is my pleasure to introduce the All CT Reads Selection Committee choice for adult reads, Yaa Gyasi, author of Transcendent Kingdom. So Yaa Gyasi was born in excuse my pronunciation, Mempong, Ghana, and raised in Huntsville, Alabama. Her first novel, Homegoing, was a Sunday Times and New York Times bestseller, won the National Book Critics Circle Award for the Best First Novel, and was shortlisted for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize for Debut Fiction. In 2017, Yaa Gyasi was selected as one of Granta's Best of Young American Novelists, and in 2019, the BBC selected her debut as one of the 100 novels that shaped our world. Her second novel, Transcendent Kingdom, was also published to wide acclaim in 2020 and was an instant New York Times bestseller. Transcendent Kingdom is a powerful, raw, intimate, deeply layered novel about a Ghanaian family in Alabama. In Transcendent Kingdom, Yaa explores the different ways family experience themselves, a family ravaged by the forces both within and beyond their control. It is the story of love, loss, inheritance, and the myriad ways we try to rebuild ourselves from the rubble of our collective pasts. And with that, Yaa Gyasi to discuss her novel, Transcendent Kingdom.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, Amara. I'm delighted to be here and really, really honored to be a part of the lineup for All CT Reads this year. So there are a few ways that I could talk about how this novel began for me. I find that it's really kind of difficult to pin down what the beginning of a novel looks like. It feels like a million different things go into it. And I'm kind of just like digging around trying to figure out where something begins. For Transcendent Kingdom, I had just finished a first draft of my first novel, Homegoing, which for those of you who don't know is a multi-generational novel that spans continents and cultures. It's about 250 years of Ghanaian and American history, and it was quite a research project. I remember finishing a first draft and feeling incredibly excited that I was done with the draft, and also really eager to kind of get it out of my head, give myself some space, think about new things. And so I ended up kind of putting it in a drawer for a few months. And in that time, I thought, I'm just going to try something completely new, something that feels totally different, kind of a palate cleanser. And so I wrote this short story, again, really quickly, and mostly for the opportunity to get to think about new things. And that short story was called Inscape. It ended up being published in Guernica, but it was in the first person about a young woman who was a Gerard Manley Hopkins scholar, whose mother was struggling with mental illness and needed to come stay with her. And I really loved the voice of that story. Again, it was so different from what I had been working on with Homegoing that it felt really refreshing and just kind of new and interesting, and kind of captivated me in a different way. And so I enjoyed the process of writing that story. I was happy to place it in Guernica, but after some time, I returned to Homegoing, and that that took over and my life changed and years passed and I kind of forgot about the story. And then after Homegoing was published, I had been working on a second novel. It was ostensibly about a woman who's kind of thinking through her relationship with her childhood religion, but truthfully, like, it was kind of a mess. And every time I went to sit down and work on it, I wasn't really excited about it. I didn't feel the spark. And so I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, and nothing was really coming up for me. And I was getting a little frustrated because I've written really my whole life. I've always been working on a project. And this was the longest stretch I'd gone without writing consistently. In that time, my childhood best friend, I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama. My friend from Alabama was getting her PhD in neuroscience at Stanford. And she was finishing up what was to be kind of her final thesis project. And she had a major paper that was due to be published with this work. And I remember being, she was so supportive and excited for me when I was, going through all of the homegoing publication stuff. I thought, this is my chance to be really supportive of her and her work. So when the paper was published, I sat down to read it and realized that I did not understand a single word of it. Like, I actually did not understand what was happening in it, which was a strange feeling for me since I make my living out of reading and words. And so I thought, what's going on here? And really mostly just out of an opportunity to want to get to know what she did and think through some of the work that she's interested in. I asked if I could go shadow her in her lab. And she very kindly said yes. And so I spent the day with her. That first day, I think this was probably January 2017. I spent the day with her at her lab, and she performed a surgery on her mice that I still remember quite vividly. I actually have pictures on my phone, but I won't show them to you for people who are squeamish. And she kind of talked me through the process. And I had always known that her work was about addiction and depression. But again, because of all the technical science stuff, I didn't really understand what the implications of that were to people like you and me, like lay people. And I found it so fascinating to hear her talk about this work and also to see her light up while she was doing this work. There's something really kind of beautiful about seeing somebody that you know really well and love really well in a different context than you're used to seeing them in. And so that was also a pleasure. And I thought, it would be nice just to spend a little time in this world as a way of kind of getting to know her. And so that began the kind of the wheels turning in my head for what would become Transcendent Kingdom. At that point, I wasn't thinking about the short story. I didn't know like what shape it was going to take. I just thought, almost as though I was approaching this like a writer's prompt of a novel, like write a book about a woman who studies addiction and depression. What would that look like? And obviously there are a million ways that you could approach it. But for me, what I decided made most sense was to have a character at the center of this novel. Gifty is her name, who is a neuroscientist who studies this phenomenon called reward-seeking behavior. And don't get scared away. Like if you haven't taken a science class since college or whatever, I also had not. And I think it's clear in the book. And I think it brings this science to a level that anyone could understand. But basically, Gifty studies things like addiction and depression. And it's at a time in her life when her own mother, who is struggling with depression, needs extra care. And so Gifty has her mom come stay with her. Again, this is the influence from that earlier short story. Her mother comes to stay with her, and she finds herself taking care of her mother, working toward her final thesis, crisis, and also kind of thinking back to the years that led up to her beloved older brother, Nana's passing from an opioid addiction. And so it's a book about, you know, mother-daughter relationships, about sibling relationships. It's about loss and kind of grief and how we deal with grief in our lives, the different forms that grieving can take. It's about what I think of as like absences that feel present in our lives. I think, you know, anyone who's lost someone knows what that feeling looks like. And yeah, it took me 2 years to write. And I was really fortunate enough to get to spend some time at the American Academy in Berlin working on it. Again, it felt so completely different from the process of writing Homegoing, which was intensely research focused, but I think of Homegoing as a project that was like, I call the research wide but shallow, by which I mean I needed to know a little bit about a lot of different time periods and places and people and things. Whereas with Transcendent Kingdom, because it was set in the present, it's just, you know, it's just this one family, not this entire large lineage. It was the opportunity to kind of dig very deep into a single subject, a single family, a single person's consciousness, because it's also in the first person. So that was a great pleasure for me to kind of think about new concerns and stretch new muscles. And yeah, it was a really, really great experience writing the book. I think a few of the things that I hope that people will take away from the novel is a better understanding of addiction as a disease, addiction as you know, something that in the case of opioids really can alter the makeup of your brain. I was writing this novel in part. I began it, I guess, around the time that we were seeing a ton of research and reportage come out around the opioid epidemic in this country, an epidemic that hasn't gone away just because of the pandemic, but just hasn't been as talked about as it was before. And what I was really admiring about this reporting is that so much of it was shifting toward an opportunity to think about addiction, again, as a healthcare crisis, as kind of a human crisis. You know, I read this piece in the New York Times that was called How Opioids Affect the Brain. That was really interesting. I saw a piece that followed grandparents who were taking care of their grandchildren because their children were struggling with addiction. I just felt like there was so much more nuance to the story than to stories that I had seen previously around the crack and heroin epidemics of the 80s and the 60s. And of course, recognizing that part of the reason for that is that this current epidemic was largely affecting white people in rural and suburban areas. And so this book felt like an opportunity to think through those questions and add that kind of nuance, but to do so in a way that put Black people, Black families at the center, and to make sure that we were being included, our stories were being included in this narrative. So that was another thing I was interested in with this novel. Yeah, let's see. I think that's all I have for you. Amara, do you have other?
Yeah, we actually have a great question related to what you're just speaking about. How do you write empathically about something you haven't necessarily experienced yourself?
Yeah, that's like the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, for me, that's the joy and the struggle of fiction, is trying as best you can to embody the mind and the consciousness of someone who doesn't exist. And I think the way that you get close to that, even if you haven't experienced the thing yourself, is to be really attuned to the stories that you see in the world, be really attuned to the people that you see in the world. For me, because I write, realistic fiction, because I write realism, I'm always kind of recognizing the fact that regardless of whether or not I have gone through the circumstances that the novels will talk about, there are very real people who have gone through something similar, if not worse, if not, just slightly different. But there are people who go through these circumstances, and seeking out their stories is often the jumping off point for me. So with Homegoing, I was reading a great deal of narratives written by enslaved people. I was reading, just as much as I could to try to get in the heads of these characters that I would be trying to write about. And as I mentioned for Transcendent Kingdom as well, like I was reading all of those news pieces about people who were suffering from opioid use disorder. That's the way to start, but it's an unsatisfying answer to a really good question, because I think part of it is just kind of tapping into your imagination, and I don't know how to explain that. I remember I had a teacher in grad school, Ethan Kanan. He wasn't my teacher, but a lot of students took classes with him, and he would always say, you have to deeply imagine, which again feels like kind of unsatisfying, and yet that's it. That's the meat of the work. You have to deeply imagine, and I think if I were to add to that, I would say that you also have to kind of be attuned to real people's stories. You have to be attuned and respectful to real people's stories.
As you're reading all these real people's stories and doing your research, then also crafting your own story, how do you deal with the emotional impact on yourself with taking all that in?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that's really important to me is to not spend all day, every day, immersed in the world of these stories, which for both of my books have been quite heavy. So I set realistic time goals for my workday. For Homegoing, I had a 400 word a day limit, and that was kind of the most, as much as I would spend working on that book, which meant that I usually wrote for about 3 hours, and then I could do other things for the rest of my day, which meant that I wasn't reading these really traumatic narratives over and over. And similarly for Transcendent Kingdom, I tried to set really, again, like manageable, small goals in terms of how much time I would spend thinking about these things. And then I think, just like with anything else, is to have like a robust personal life beyond your professional life. So maintain your friendships, keep talking to your therapist, your family, whatever other things you do beyond the work that kind of help you keep yourself together. Continue to do that, and in some ways I think kind of privilege it more than you do in the periods where you're not writing, where you're not kind of thinking about those things, because that's the release valve, is your regular life. So, I watch plenty of bad TV, I read a ton, and that helps.
Okay, and we have time for one more question, and this is one of my favorite questions to ask of an author. But what was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. When we first came to America when I was 2, and we came because my father was getting his PhD in French language and Francophone African literature. And one of my most vivid early memories is watching him work on his dissertation on this old clunky typewriter that he had, and just seeing him every day kind of put in that kind of work. And I don't think I really could have articulated this to myself when I was that young, that this had a huge impact on me. But in hindsight, I think part of what made a life in language and literature feel possible was kind of seeing somebody dedicate themselves to that task of writing something, of making language out of something that they were thinking about. And I never read the dissertation. Like, I have no idea what he was like actually writing, but there was something really moving to me, and still quite moving to me, about seeing somebody sit down every day and try to put words on a page, even if it wasn't creative. So I think that's one that sticks with me.
That's a wonderful image, and it's been lovely to chat with you this evening, and to learn more about what goes into your stories. Once I picked up Transcendent Kingdom, I was unable to put it down. It was just a wonderful read. And so thank you for being a part of this, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kim.
Thank you. Thank you, Amara, and thank you, Yaa, for joining us. I am so blown away, and I think Amara's question and your response is beyond the perfect way to end a fantastic evening. So thank you, attendees. Thank you, book selection committee members. Thank you to our partners at the Center for the Book at Connecticut Humanities, the Connecticut Association of School Librarians, the Connecticut Library Consortium. Oh my gosh, Connecticut has so many syllables in it. EBSCO, the Connecticut Heritage Foundation, and the biggest thank you to our division director, Don Laval, and our state librarian, Deborah Schonder, both of whom are here. We could not have done this work without the support of Don and Deborah. We could not have done this work without our partners, and we could not have done this work without our book selection committee, and maybe more importantly than us, the authors. My goodness gracious, we could not have planned purposefully a better inaugural all CT Reads book list if we had tried. We really couldn't have. So thank you, everyone. I hope this was a really nice Thursday evening for you all. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can access our website, these book discussion sets, the support materials we put together, more information about the authors, books, and publishers at our website. Thank you, Ashley. I was just about to say it. We thank you all. Have a fantastic rest of your night. Have a great weekend. Stay warm. Gracious goodness, it gets cold in Connecticut, which again, one too many syllables. And have a fantastic rest of your evening, everybody. Good night.